Yes, quotas went up and your comp plan doesn't always go up with it. And so explaining that, which there's always no fun. I think all salespeople expect it now. And that's the one thing over lunch that everybody talks about. My point is incentivizing fairly those things that are really important to the business is what has to happen. And that sounds like a no-brainer comment, I realize, but I have been surprised how often that doesn't happen.
This is the Sales Comp Guy podcast, and I'm your guy, Christopher Goff. Hey, Shad, thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to have a great conversation here.
Yeah, Chris, it's great to see you.
How did you get into sales? Where did that come from?
People say you kind of fall into it. There's not many people that show up, that leave high school going into college saying, I want to be a professional salesperson. You just don't hear it very much. I mean, I've only heard it a couple of times. In my particular situation, it was probably through college. At one of my summer jobs, I worked construction, which was fantastic. I learned a ton and worked my tail off and realized I probably wasn't cut out for construction. I was tarring a roof in July in Oklahoma. So that's not the time of year or temperature that you want to be tarring a roof. It was a hell of a way to learn a lot of real lessons about hard work and those kinds of things. And it was great. One summer, I decided I wanted to try to sell cars for the summer. And I'm a college student. I didn't have a car, and I knew that you could get a demo if you sold cars. So I was kind of meeting a couple of needs. Hours were reasonably flexible. But the irony of it is I learned so much from the people there in how to understand people, just from a pure selling standpoint, how to read the signs, knowing when to shut up, knowing when you need to shake hands and say, I've got another appointment or whatever it might be, because, you knew you weren't going to be spending productive time with somebody. So I did that and just had a great time with it. And then I got into healthcare, went to grad school, started with Cerner Corporation after college, went through some professional and intense sales training with Cerner Corporation. And it was a class that lasted about a year that included, all kinds of things, sales related. Yes. Understanding the solutions, understanding the problems and the issues and those kinds of things. Really smart and intelligent buyers. There's a really cool mix of, hey, speak plainly to me and tell me what's good and why. Tell me the why and get to it pretty quickly. But then also understanding that there is a real technical competence that's needed and building teams and credibility and all that stuff.
So did you feel like you understood that those were the things that you learned in the moment? So like when you were selling cars, you were like, oh, I now have figured out, or I know how to interact with people? Or did it come many years later where you look back and be like, I guess that's what I picked up?
I didn't realize it at the time, but I probably picked up that the minute you put on a sales mask or a sales hat, you're done, which I didn't want to do that. I respect all sales professions. I knew I wasn't going to be a car salesman. I didn't think I was going to be, selling software either, to be honest with you. But I had some freedom probably in being myself, and I gravitate towards authentic people. And I think other people do too. And authenticity is sometimes lacking, I think, especially with the caricature that people have of salespeople. So if you can be yourself, man. Like understand what your duty is, what your goal is, and have all the things and the training, but don't force it. Be yourself.
Yeah, I think that is a lesson that I think a lot of people do eventually learn, that there's this sentiment of trying hard to play a character versus acknowledging that the version of you brings with it something that can connect with other human beings. And the flaws and the realities, the pros and the cons are exactly what people need to believe that you're, for all intents and purposes, not a sociopath. Like you're real, you have emotions, you have flaws, you got problems, they got problems, they got issues, they got emotions, all of that sort of stuff. And I feel like childhood lesson here, be yourself. You may get bullied for it as a kid, but eventually it serves you well.
Yeah, I think so too. I've got some great stories from that summer. That's probably for another podcast.
If you got great stories, maybe you can pick one. I wouldn't mind hearing it.
Oh, well, this was on a Mercedes lot. It was a pretty good clientele, and this was in downtown
Yes.
Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm from. I'm from Oklahoma City, but downtown Tulsa is where I was at the time. And the used car manager where I was this like, he was the caricature, honestly. He was exactly what you're thinking, like car wholesaler kind of fella, just all about the deal and getting to know as quickly as possible, finding out, which is a really valuable lesson, get to the objection as quickly as possible.
Right.
But that fella, I'm telling you, he was so good at understanding who he was talking to and how to respond. He may have been a bit of a psychopath, sociopath. I'm not sure which one, but he may have been kind of a mirroring person. But at his core, though, he understood people, which I think I learned from because I was always watching him and observing him. And so he got in my face a couple of times. And I'm like, I don't know, I was like 20, maybe. I was just a guy, like I needed a car for the summer. And this was a good way to get one, to drive one, a demo. So anyways, he got in my face a couple of times, but I learned really valuable lessons from him. And one of them was like being honest with people, like painfully honest, like just explaining what the situation was. I was on a demo with this guy. We were maybe he just needed to share things that day. I don't know, but he started telling me in kind of decent detail about his divorce, which I thought was pretty crazy. And so I'm just listening, I'm 20.
Yeah. He needed someone to listen that day.
Yeah, I can't provide a whole lot of counsel to this poor fella. Another time, a fella in the middle of the day, he got yelled at by the guy that was always yelling at me. And so he decided, I don't want to do this anymore. And he left at noon and he walked because he had a demo too. He walked 10 miles home.
Wow.
So anyways, I know you probably didn't expect to hear those car salesman's stories, but it's entertaining for me. It was certainly kind of core to me figuring out how I'm supposed to be under pressure from a kind of a hard driving sales manager, but then also keeping it authentic with the people that I'm working with.
I think that's helpful. And one of the things that just peaked for me was something that you were saying of the being potentially even brutally honest. I think that's an interesting thing that people have this tendency to be fearful of saying the wrong thing or talking about truths, that the product might not be good for you. You maybe can't afford this. Now may not be the right time. And in a way, just being honest is probably a better long-term strategy than holding off and not saying something that you kind of know to be true because it could lose you the deal. But by not acknowledging that fact that it's like we should not do business and there's good reasons for it and call it out for what it is, you're probably just sort of holding back what's gonna happen anyway.
Yeah, I think risking the sale, you could sometimes be perceived that being completely transparent may cause risking the sale, but it actually more often than not is going to bring you closer to the relationship that's needed to move forward. And if you don't move forward, then there's probably some other good reason that it didn't move forward, but if you do, you got a partner.
Yeah, and I think it was Jeffrey Gitomer, I think is the one who said, have a sentiment of the sales cycle length being infinity. If you have a genuine, like, we're going to have a relationship, it may not be now, it may not be this product, it may not be what I'm selling you. If it is one of those things, then we'll cross paths again. And this being the good person will ultimately improve the outcome for both of us, because I shouldn't be selling you something you don't want.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So did you have any like strong mentors other than the questionable guy at the car dealership?
I did. Yeah. Several very strong personalities, people that were authentic enough to provide real, like meaningful counsel, to take the time to actually tell you, hey, you're terrible at this. You need to work on this. One of the lessons is that you can learn something from everybody. Everybody knows something that you don't. There's always something to learn from everybody. I think is something I try to carry every single day. I never take an option that forecloses future options. I apply that kind of filter to any kind of major decision. Am I taking an option that is going to foreclose any future options? I think it's really important. You can't have a friend if you're not willing to be a friend. I think that's important too. Trying to stress the importance of being aware of what's happening around you. And I'm not talking about when you're driving through a questionable neighborhood or anything like that. I mean, just in any situation, understanding what's happening with the other people in your lives, who you might be with. Stephen Covey quote is seek first to understand. And I think that's really important. And if you can understand where someone is coming from, is maybe a little more philosophical than just X's and O's from a sales standpoint. But if you understand where somebody's coming from, you can so much better build a connection, personal or otherwise. That requires trust, and it's hard to trust people. And it also requires sharing things that you might not otherwise share. I'm a believer in this idea that sales is this incredibly important job and profession and career. There's all kinds of operational impacts, but I can say with great confidence that the great companies in the world would not exist if there weren't amazing salespeople somewhere in the process making that thing go.
I think it's a bit of a calling for people. It's not a job. I definitely think it's a profession. And for the people that do really connect in the way that you commented, I feel like it's almost a calling. It's like, this is the reason I'm here.
Yeah. And I think too, we were kind of talking about this earlier. There is a persona or a character trait, something in a lot of salespeople's DNA that just thrives on that end of quarter rush, pressure, and adrenaline. Like they're adrenaline junkies, and that's why like a lot of former competitive athletes may get into sales roles. I think the reality is too that there are more than 100,000 sales methodologies. And I think everybody has their own. And there is a freedom in the sales profession that allows you to figure out how best you can operate to meet the results. And sales is one of those things where I don't care what process you use. If you get there, then you'll be highly valued. You're the winner, that kind of thing. Of course, there's some process you got to follow, like nobody loves working in a CRM and those kinds of things. So you do the things that you got to do. Those are the tools that you have to work with. But how you are and who you are, that's up to you. You get to figure that out.
Yeah, I think that fits with a lot of what you said about being authentic. It's kind of like Michael Jordan can't teach everybody to be Michael Jordan. And as a coach, as a leader, especially as a successful salesperson, it doesn't mean you make carbon copies of yourself. It means you have to then use and identify what are the strengths of the team players. And so I think on that note, how would you describe your leadership styles, for a sales leader?
Just generally leading any team, I wouldn't ask anybody to do something I'm not willing to do myself or that I haven't done 100 times. Being able to communicate very clear objectives from the interview process to day one to the end of the first year and beyond. Setting clear objectives and being able to explain them to people, I think is really, really important. And as a part of that, I think it's also explaining that if you don't meet these objectives, then we're going to have to figure out together what you need, what you're not getting so that you can achieve those objectives. And then the real life situation is not everybody is going to be successful. Jack Welch said something like he owed it to those people who maybe they weren't in the right job or they weren't performing up to a standard that was required. And he felt it was his obligation to that person. Again, it goes back to being authentic. If you're surprising somebody with a performance improvement plan, if they're surprised by it, then there has been a communication problem. I very much love working with building teams, being successful and working through problems, really. If you think you've got an impossible situation, well, let's dig in. Let's see what we can do. I love an impossible situation. Let's see how we battle through this.
So it sounded like there was a lot of clarity, right? So understanding the role, understanding the tasks, making those connections, as well as problem solving, which they very naturally is like The job of sales is to overcome the problem of connecting the clients to your company. So you've got to go find them and then help them receive the value of what you have to offer and want to move forward as a partnership. So in that naturally connects with what I do on a daily basis, sales compensation. I feel like objectives and setting targets and making sure that the content of the job, effectively the roles and responsibilities, are super, super clear, and that we're reinforcing the actions, the activities that are in support of an objective, right? Very, very clearly are communicated, right, in that plan. Otherwise, it's not a good comp plan. So when you think of comp plans in your past, what was like a worst and best type of situation?
My perspective regarding comp comes from a couple of different angles. So I've been an individual contributor, led regional teams, led national teams, been CEO of a company, been chief growth officer or senior VP of business development. Probably the worst plan that I was a part of may have been one that I designed. Providers were incentivized to go implement an EHR in their practice. We were a good company. We also offered managed services and consulting services. And in the plan that I put together, it was probably too simple. It was, if you sell X amount, you're going to be paid X amount. And I say that it may have been the worst. And again, my role at the time was as CEO. I didn't define the plan enough to meet the real requirements that the business needed. And I didn't incentivize things that were important to the company that would have been very helpful. I should have incentivized those things more. And a part of this was a learning process. Of course, we would adjust the plan going forward and all of those kinds of things. My perspective was, as a salesperson, I want a really straightforward comp plan. Selling consulting services is incredibly valuable. Margins are much smaller. So you might get paid a little less on a consulting services deal, which actually might mean more to the company than selling a product, because there can sometimes be just a long lasting relationship that's developed with a consulting relationship. Whereas with software, it's 100% margin, or let's call it 100% margin. It's pretty straightforward. You can make a bunch of money. It's a longer sales process. But if you can sell the consulting services first, most likely you're going to sell software if you've done a good job on the front end. So maybe incentivize consulting services, deal terms, those kinds of things. And I don't mean like number of years. That's a component, of course, but I mean payment terms, structure up front, how much you're paying each month. Is there a ramp in payments? Are you structuring it so there's zero capital up front so it can be sold? Or are you so good of a salesperson that you can structure all of the payment upfront or some large portion of the payment upfront, and incentivizing people to do that? So there's some levels of complication, I think, that actually, when you understand and communicate it the right way and tie it back to the importance of the business and what you're trying to achieve in that fiscal year or quarter or whatever it is, I think it builds a sense of like, hey, we're all in this to go achieve this for our company.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because what needs to happen in that sort of world is that you bring your salespeople along as business partners. They are the ones who intimately understand this is what the business needs to survive sustainably, and deals need to be of this quality or better. And we define quality in these ways. We have to be able to have the cash flow to employ the other people to provide services. It's part of the requirements of the deal that we need in order to keep people employed, so that you, as a seller, can have a good experience going forward with that customer and future customers. But there's a heavy dependence on financial acumen and a comfort level from somebody like you were kind of saying, like with the CEO, especially of a smaller company, where we got to talk about the nuances of the plan. And if you can't overcome some of that, it can be a real challenge for your longevity and the impact of the success of the organization.
Yeah. Some other things that have been bad that I didn't author but that I've been a participant of is quarterly spiffs. I think it can be helpful to go drive, those quarter goals, but I always found them to be a little bit hokey. I think they would help. Maybe they would drive some short-term business, but you got people reacting to this widget that needed to be sold in this time frame. I realize that there are businesses have been built by really driving one particular thing over X amount of time, and you go run really hard to go do those things, and then you go do the next thing. I've been in software my entire careers, and it is a solution sale, or it's a complex sale, it's a strategic sale. And so I think comp plans in a strategic selling environment where they can cause confusion in the message and what you're really trying to do big picture. Invariably, those widgets come and go. And a lot of times there are so many rules around selling that widget that it just becomes noise. It distracts people from what you're really trying to do. And to leadership and to sales leaders and even to salespeople, it feels like it's not a success when really it's a point in time, point solution widget kind of thing that probably doesn't pay you enough money to pay tuition or whatever you're trying to get done. It doesn't get the attention that everyone else who thinks it's a great idea up in the C-suite really should pay it. That's a lot of words for saying, man, keep people on target, really focus on what you really want them to do. And the more things you throw at them that are outside of kind of that core competency that you're trying to drive, I think it can be a problem.
I absolutely agree. I think spiffs kind of have their place for moments in time where it's a very clear action, where I think it works better for transactional businesses where go do this one thing and there isn't a lot of like lag or opportunity costs associated with that role. It's like your traditional inside sales or lead generation type of functions where we need you to do this one thing. And next month, we may ask you to do something different or whatever it is. You get on the phone, you do your thing, right? And then there's no sort of hangover associated with it. The more sort of contests, spiffs, kickers you throw at people, the more money you actually make the plan. And it detracts or distracts from the core components of execution.
I think it does. I'm sure others would argue that point, but just as a practical matter, if you have to incentivize something so highly to be sold, there's a reason for it. Sometimes it doesn't fit with what you're doing. And so you think, well, if I pay these people a lot of money, some of that may be true, but also those people are kind of dependent on being successful. If you're constantly throwing things at people that they can't be successful with, it starts to weigh on the salesperson. I've had these conversations with really good salespeople that are like, man, I know I'm good at what I do, but this environment just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. It can serve to demotivate. Throwing money at problems doesn't fix problems.
A follow on to that, and it's another comp plan. It was a really rich comp plan. And it was so rich, one of my duties, which was really hard, was to change the comp plan. It would pay 100% of the commission almost at contract execution, which is bizarre. This was a holdover from another era of software sales. It just doesn't work that way now. Maybe it does somewhere. If it does, what would happen is the long sales cycle and all the things related to selling into healthcare, people would create really high value deals in terms of total deal size, total deal value over a term, but the payment terms might be such that that client might not pay much of anything for 6 months or a year. Meanwhile, the salesperson was getting paid a big sum up front. And that's the wrong model, right? I benefited from some of that. But then I was also then became the operator to go try and fix it. And culturally, it was a really hard shift because there were people saying, you don't value sales people anymore. You're trying to change my job. It's the whole, you move my cheese kind of thing. The business, it's not sustainable for the business, and we're incentivizing the wrong behavior. So we need to have things like quality contract incentives. So incentivizing those things that are really important for the business, which then make it strategic to the business, and you become an even more part of the operations and important to the sales process.
So did you have to make it more rich for doing the better deals in order to kind of having to like navigate through that significant cultural dynamic?
Well, it didn't make you more rich. You had ways to create the quality of deal that would pay you more for the better business deal that you put together. Yes, quotas went up and your comp plan doesn't always go up with it. And so explaining that, which there's always no fun. I think all salespeople expect it now. And that's the one thing over lunch that everybody talks about. My point is incentivizing fairly those things that are really important to the business is what has to happen. And that sounds like a no-brainer comment, I realize, but I have been surprised how often that doesn't happen.
I think that's a good perspective for salespeople and maybe more junior salespeople or even some senior salespeople who have lost perspective on the reason you're employed is to bring quality enough transactions. Because if we didn't, then we wouldn't need the sales positions. I mean, that's kind of the sentiment is they have to be quality enough to essentially cover the multiples of your comp and others' compensation throughout the organization so we can deliver the services at a profit. That's what the organization's job is to do. So when you think about some like life lessons, as you've shared a couple of them, what would you say to a salesperson? Let's say they're newer in their career. Maybe they have aspirations of growth in that career and maybe even into leadership. What would be some things to pay attention to, be on the lookout for? What would you give as guidance to them?
Build a team, win as a team. Winning as a team allows for greater longevity in the career. The flip to that is if you're losing on your own versus losing as a team, you're in a much better position if you're losing as a team. Don't be the Lone Ranger, whether you're winning or losing. I don't think that's helpful, both professionally, personally, for the company, and being inclusive in the process is a really good thing.
When you're saying team, are you meaning like surround yourself with other people in the organization, not just sellers, but other people that can help you be successful in that act of selling?
I think it's having the confidence to go ask for help when needed, advice, sharing what your process is, and trying to understand what somebody else's process is, especially somebody that's been successful. Mentoring people is important. And I also think being a protege is important. I thought it was offensive at the time. I was assigned a coach 10 years ago, something like that. And I thought, I'll be damned. Coach, what do I need a coach for? I think thought I was, of course, everybody thinks they're great. And what I realized is, oh my God, there are all kinds of reasons that I needed a coach and learned from, didn't know I needed them, And so until you maybe realize that you aren't God's gift to anybody who's trying to buy something, the better. There's something to learn from everybody. Team selling is great, especially in complex or strategic sales. That's just kind of part of the deal where you need to be a good team leader. We call it a project leader, call it a coach, call it a sales leader, whatever it is. You're the guy that's trying to plug in to understand what your resources are and plug in the right resource for that particular person you're trying to influence. Like, I love that kind of stuff.
I think that's interesting that you've been able to sort of watch the evolution of software from that initial license fee methodology, right? You paid a bunch of cash up front to own the software, move to more of the subscription model. You're leasing the software to what seems to be more of a consumption or usage base sort of approach to software. These things have just been the evolution of the way that people are using technology, right? So the way in which a seller has to interact probably in a way hasn't changed much because you need differing types of expertise surrounding you to help structure the partnership. Back in the day, it would have been you had to have your own hardware and your hosting, right? Then you have more of an access and security perspective. Then you have more customer success. That is a reinforcement of the usage of the software, making sure everybody gets what they paid for. And then whatever the new world will continue to look like. So I think your commentary on get a team, get good people to surround you makes a lot of sense.
That's what I like. That's the part that I love about it.
So if you were like a new sales leader or young sales leader, what would be something that you feel like you've learned over the last couple years in that type of role, what would you give as a piece of advice for them?
Probably that person who's been promoted into that role was probably a really good salesperson, and then they were promoted based on their results. The irony is the things that got you there might not apply in the next role. They just might not. One of the best fellas that I worked for, I'm going to say his name. His name's Mike Fiorito. Just fantastic. He was really, really good at letting you do your job, providing encouragement and counsel and years of experience and understanding kind of how the world works. But when it came down to letting you be the person, he let you be the guy. He wasn't the sales executive that was going to come in and clear the table and I'm in charge now and here's how this deal's going to go and blah, blah, blah. He wasn't like that. And I think there's a tendency because there's huge component of ego, a part of all of these wins that a successful salesperson might have. They all of a sudden think they got all the answers and it's just magic. But when they show up, they're going to win because they're the guy. When in reality, it's the salesperson who owns the relationship, the trusted relationship, and you got to let that thing work.
So one of those, the takeaway there would be don't try to be the super sales rep, if you will.
Yeah.
Don't.
Yeah, that's a really good way to say it.
And so delegation and trust to let the people be the people, because otherwise, why are you employing them? You know, to a certain point, there's a little bit of like paternal sentiment there, right? Like take a step back and let them succeed or fail on their own accord so that they know how and what to do. Otherwise, they won't know how and what to do.
Yeah. And I think exhibiting the behavior that you expect is really important too. Criticizing in private and praising in public, those kinds of things. I don't subscribe to the idea that you need to beat people up during deal reviews to show people how strong a leader you are or how serious you are about this or those kinds of things. It's hard to make a person feel a real sense of urgency. They have to have that on their own. And some people have it and some people don't.
That's that sentiment of the beatings will continue until morale improves.
I prescribe my approach to humans just as I do my pets. But you can't do that with people. You're not going to get what you want out of them. I think people confuse being nice with weakness, which is kind of crazy in society. Maybe you work with people long enough and I think they understand where you're coming from, but it's okay to be a normal, fully formed human being that likes being around other people and also have like rules and expectations and all of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there feels like there's sort of like what you show up on as on television or on social media. You got to show the all kinds of the emotions, you know, because it's just being recorded, right? And if it doesn't happen, it's not real, you know.
Chris, this was a few years ago. I was going through this interview process and I had met with the CEO. I had a great conversation. I thought we were like-minded on things. And then I had a second interview with like a consultant that they had hired to help vet candidates or something like that. I'm not really sure. I think it was somebody that they ended up hiring to do the job. But the feedback I got after meeting with this consultant was that I was too nice. I totally understand where that sentiment comes from because in the private equity world, you need some tough guy to come in and shove people around so that we can hit that EPS. Like, that ain't me. Like, if you're looking for somebody to go bash skulls, I'm not your guy. Plenty of the skull bashers are out there. There are a dime a dozen, actually, and they may or may not have been successful. But most really good salespeople are good at is selling themselves to the next job. Sometimes I think those skull bashers are the folks that maybe hop around a little bit more. Even if they're successful, they may be successful.
Yeah. Well, and they leave nothing but chaos and destruction in there, which does have its place because there are those buyers who do not give a shit about what the company looks like. They just want to sell it. If it looks good on paper, great. It's your problem now. And then somebody else who actually is interested in fixing the things then has to go and take care of that, right? The hired gun does the deeds, the dirty deeds done dirt cheap, probably not so dirty, not so cheap, right? But they do the things that need to be done, and somebody else has to deal with it later. Things used to work here. They don't anymore. Now we'll start over.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that probably sums up a lot of our conversation for the day. But I do have just like a little bit of a recap for us, if that's okay. If I think about a lot of what you said, I think that the clarity of objectives, being authentic, is an important distinction. When we talk about that leadership, it's people who aspire to lead have to let the person that they're now leading be themselves, their version of themselves. Don't try to overlead or take over. And it sounded like some of the best comp plans and versus the worst comp plans really looked about like strategic alignment with the organization. And it's not just about richness, but it's really about having the transparency of what the organization needs, as well as that alignment to deliver on that. And I would probably say the only last thing would be, hey, if you're partnering with somebody doing compensation, right, and you're talking to somebody and giving them guidance on sales comp, what lasting comment or remark that you feel like is needed or needs to be added?
I think every company needs to be a sales company. And I distinguish that because a salesperson wants to work for a company that values salespeople, that values the profession, the art and science of a deal, of telling the story in the beginning and then crafting a business relationship that's mutually advantageous to the client and to the company that's doing the selling. I make the distinction of it may happen more in software than maybe other industries, just to be transparent. I don't know how it works in other industries, but in software, sometimes there's two camps. One is that's an engineering company and they're totally focused on engineering and delivering software. And the salespeople are kind of an afterthought because of the geniuses that are building this amazing software. And there's always a rub. Those companies where engineering values and relies on the people in the field and treats them as the professionals that they are, it's a much better culture. It goes back to that team building thing and understanding what the objectives are of the company broadly, communicating requirements from the field back to the engineering team. There has to be such a great relationship and balance. And so I would just say, and this is what I try to do, is just value the people that are selling, because they're, in my mind, they're the fighter pilots of the deal. And the guys doing the hard work back home are also equally important. But if you're not treating the guys that are out flying the jets really good, neither thing is going to work.
Yeah, I think that's meaningful, and compensation should show that and distinctly separate those roles. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's almost like it's as old as time, the conflict between sales and ops, or sales and services, or sales and product, you name it, right? And everybody points fingers when something doesn't work, and there's a back and forth. But I agree that when it all boils down to it, you don't have revenue without sales. So if that doesn't happen, you don't have a company for long. So it is an important distinction, regardless of recognizing the value of selling. Well, Shad, thank you very much for joining me. Appreciate the conversation.
Great. Yeah, you're making me think of things maybe I haven't thought of in a while. It's awesome how we all get to where we are in life now, and I don't know, keep on fighting, I guess. Who knows what's next? I could not have predicted all the things up to this point. So that's what gets me going.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe and connect with me on LinkedIn for more sales comp advice and insights.